Welcome to Aim High Live. I'm your host and CEO, Jim Park. Today we are honored to have Jerry Yang on our program. Certainly an individual who does not need any introduction. We all know Jerry Yang as a co-founder of Yahoo. He also founded AME Cloud Ventures, a fund that invests in seed stage to later stage tech companies building infrastructure and value chains around data. Inspired by the recent social justice movement and hate crimes against AAPIs, Jerry spearheaded the launch of the Asian American Foundation, the largest philanthropic commitment to support AAPI community in this country's history. In this episode, Ginger Liu, AIM's co-founder, interviews Jerry Yang during our 2021 national conference regarding his views on investment strategies that will meet some of the most pressing challenges facing us globally, as well as his personal motivation for engaging in issues facing the AAPI community. With that, I welcome Jerry Yang and Ginger Liu to today's conversation.
Welcome, Jerry. Wonderful to see you again.
Hi, Ginger.
Well, I wanted to express our deep appreciation for your taking time out of a very busy schedule to meet with us today at the AIM conference. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but it sounds like you guys are ready to have a party over there.
We are indeed. We are indeed. Now, most folks know you as the co-founder of Yahoo, and I know that you not too long ago founded AME Cloud Ventures, which invests in seed and early stage technology companies building infrastructure and value chains around data. So before we get into the primary topic of our discussion this afternoon, can you share some insights into what intriguing technologies you've seen in this space, what's grabbing your attention these days?
Yeah, Ginger, I count myself as one of the luckiest people you guys will meet. I obviously immigrant from Taiwan when I was 10. I was lucky enough to go to my alma mater, Stanford. I was lucky enough to meet David Filo and start Yahoo. And then was even lucky enough to meet people like Masayoshi Son and Jack Ma in my career. And by 2012, when I was leaving Yahoo, I really felt like I lost connection with the entrepreneur in the tech scene. I was dealing with a very big company and big company issues, and felt like I lost in touch with what was really motivating me as an entrepreneur, which is the innovation, the technology, and the entrepreneurial spirit that was in Silicon Valley. So also my wife told me I could go do anything I want, but just don't start another company. And so starting AME Cloud Ventures was an attempt at myself to try to get back to being in my entrepreneurial roots, to try to help the two, usually now a woman and a man in a garage with a great idea and try to help them scale. And I didn't think I was going to do it for 9 years. It's been something I thought maybe some new idea will come along and I will go start a new company or I'll get involved in something else again. But I've had a blast. And I think this idea of following data-driven theme has carried us into this magnificent journey. We started with just sort of big data in 2012. Then came a lot of artificial intelligence, AI kind of applications, everything from autonomous driving to navigation to robotics. We are still doing a lot of robotic companies to space tech. If you look at all the companies that are involved in commercializing the space sector, to food tech, if you think about things like Impossible Foods, these are all ideas that I think are enabled by the digital, the cloud, and the mobility trend that we've been seeing. The one area, that probably has, if you asked me, 9 years ago, I would have been very surprised, but now we're deeply in, is the space of sort of digital life science. And so if you think about life science on the one hand, where it's biology, it's drug discovery, it's people trying to, started with a lot of genomics and biomics, and then combining that with the digital assets of artificial intelligence, of machine learning and vision-based learning. There is tremendous entrepreneurial energy and benefits from taking biological process and applying digital discipline. And we have just seen an explosion of that. So I would say that's probably one area where we see a huge amount of progress. And, looking a little bit in the future, this is your area, Ginger, you've done so much in this. I think we all look at, and this is where I could be totally wrong. And I was probably totally wrong 9 years ago about a bunch of stuff. And, but I think, I think we have no choice but to look at a world where we decarbonize our economy. And if you look at decarbonizing our economy at scale, not just for the United States, but probably around the world, we have a large gap of innovation that we need to do. We have a large gap of affordability that we need to do, and how do we do it all equitably? So I believe there's a huge amount of technology innovation that's going to come out to decarbonize our global economies. And by the way, and I think that'll be one of the hugest economic events that will happen. And maybe even 5 years ago, and you've been in the space, a lot of the sustainability investments ideas were considered sort of just the do good, the altruistic, the philanthropic side. But I've seen this change, obviously, with renewables and electric vehicles and cars. You're starting to see this to become more an investable area. And I think that's where, obviously a lot of ESG elements in investment world now. And then there is obviously the huge idea of companies decarbonizing their, set goals for 2030, 2040, 2050. All of these is creating a marketplace for technologies and for innovation to really solve our sort of our carbon economy. So I'm pretty excited about that, as you can tell. And it's something that we'll see. Maybe in 9 years we'll talk again and see how we do. But it's these sort of large trends that I'm very interested in, because with sort of the rising tide, you just got to pick the right tide, and then you got to pick the right entrepreneurs. I'm very fortunate to have met some great entrepreneurs. The company we're doing this on Zoom, I was very early in meeting Eric Yuan and him being able to take a very simple idea of just being able to do video conferencing better, to be where we are now. So I think that combination of a great space where we believe there's huge economic change and disruption, and then great entrepreneurs.
Great. Well, you certainly have been a real instigator in terms of seeding some innovative technologies. Now, turning to your passion about serving the AAPI community, you were instrumental in the development of the Asian American Fund, and you assembled an incredible board as well as a great team led by Sonal Shah. Can you give us a little bit of background about what motivated you and the other leaders to establish TAF?
Yeah, thank you. And I know many of you are involved in your local communities, and being in the investment business, I think you guys see a lot of philanthropy and people who are trying to give back. And I would say that growing up in America, we all have our own stories. I would never thought that we would, in my 50s, build an organization to fight anti-Asian hate. And then I think it's a very sad reason that we have come together. But from this sad reason, we think there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of positives that's going to come out. And, Ginger, I think this came about a little bit out of a surprise. We had a group of friends from our Jewish community at the Anti-Defamation League, ADL. They contacted us in March of 2020, so over 18 months ago. And they said, hate speech on Asians are becoming normalized. And I didn't even know what that meant. I said, what do you mean by normalized? And our friends at ADL says, that just means that they're watching anti-Semitic speech or extremism speech online and elsewhere in media. And they noticed that it is okay to start talking disparagingly about Asians in general. It's okay because the president at that time was talking about the China virus and the Kung flu. And so that there is more permission given to speak up against Asians. And what they say was very alarming. They say, look, once speech is normalized around hate, then you can put a clock to it. You can look at hate incidents, and those will be, sort of spitting and racial slurs, to violence, to damage against businesses, to vandalism, and only will increase. And sadly, ADL was right. They predicted the curve that we were going to see, and over the course of last year, we started to see, just the number of incidents go up, and we decided that we needed our own Asian version of protection. I think it is the worst feeling in the world when we walk on the street and are not feeling safe. What's worse is, my mother walking on the street and not feeling safe. And I think never in our sort of American life, we felt that. And to feel for that first time, I think it's a very visceral and very real feeling. We had a TAF event last night. It's one of the reasons I can't be with you today. We're doing a bunch of filming on some of our anti-hate efforts here in my office. But, talking to Joe Tsai, who's a founding board member for TAF, talking to Daniel Dae Kim, who's our chair for our advisory council and a famous actor, they each had recent experiences of being afraid of people accosting them, or people telling them stuff that we would never hear of 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So I think the sentiment of Asians in America is that, it's one of not feeling as secure because of the way we look. And I think that's just not American. So TAF was started with the idea of how do we address anti-Asian hate, but not just to stop the hate. It's really has to be done through narrative change. How do people perceive us? What is our role in society? And by the way, I think conflict with Asia tends to bring out increased, hate and discrimination incidents. It's just the way it is. We see that with our Jewish community when there is, in May, when there is a tension with the Gaza, anti-Semitism went up here in the U.S. And so, as the US and China involve themselves in this big geopolitical competition, it is probably going to be not just because of COVID, we're probably going to see a sort of sustained conflict, then it probably will be sustained in terms of racism. And so I think TAF was built to talk about Asians in America, talk about our celebrate our differences. I mean, if you look at the Asians in America, there are 20 plus ethnic groups that's qualified in AAPI, maybe even more given that, sort of the Pacific Islanders. But, the fact is that we're all very different if you look at culturally, but a large part of us came through this country through immigration. A lot of parts came through this because we believe in the American way of life. And so I think this idea of celebrating our commonality, but also celebrating our differences are sort of the greatest strength of AAPI. Because I think if you look at the external world, they look at our community as monolithic. We have all these stereotypes that are placed on us. But when we look internally, we are very different. And I think that how do we take that and draw strength, and how do we take that and draw solidarity, and how do we take that and draw unity around it and create hope and belonging and prosperity? That's why we started TAF. Sadly, it rose out of hate, but I think we're hoping to build it around hope.
Now, I know one of the goals of TAF has been to get partnerships and financial commitments from endowments, foundations, corporations, and state and federal government agencies. Your organization in a very short time has raised a very impressive amount of money. And how do you think we can continue to build on the financial commitments that have been made to date? And equally important, how do we ensure that we build the type of infrastructure and support for our Asian Pacific American Islander organizations so that they can deliver the services and solutions at the local level?
One of the glaring gaps that we saw as a result of a lot of the stereotypes we talked about is that the Asian American community organizations don't need money because Asians are doing fine. And the reality is when we started TAF, we did a survey and just went out and talked to a lot of our community organizations. Many of the great community organizations have been in the communities or have been serving their constituency for decades, and passionate leaders, mission driven people who are doing this for their life. But the thing that we keep hearing back is that they don't have the resources. They don't, they have to go raise the money, and once they raise the money, they have to go give it away. And so it's this sort of churn, sort of the hand to mouth idea. And so one of our board members, Joe Bay at KKR, thought about this idea of a giving challenge where we're taking advantage of this notion that if you look at all the money that's given by these foundations and corporations over the last 5 to 10 years, whereas the Asian American population is like 6% of our population, 23 million, the amount of giving from the foundations and corporations is less than 1%. It's 0.5%. And so there is a huge disparity just to even get us to the level that we ought to have for our communities. So we went to companies, we went to foundations. We'll talk about government in a second, Ginger, but I think the idea is to say, look, what can you guys do for your employees that are Asian? What are you guys going to do for communities that you live in that have Asian organizations? And can you just up that commitment from whatever dollar is today, give us a 5-year number. And you don't have to give it to TAF. You could do it in your DEI work, and you can do it in your ERG work, you can do your leadership development work, you can do it in your customer work. Whatever number it is, we're going to throw into this challenge. And that's the 1.1 billion number that we came up with. TAF also, as an organization, have raised, sort of hard dollars, the real cash. Not 1.1 billion, but it's in the hundreds of millions that we intend to not only be a funder of key activities like the anti-hate and some of the other initiatives, but also really to build up capacity, build up the infrastructure point. For example, data. My thing. We know surprisingly little about who we are as a community. What does AAPI look like in today? There's a census, but has it been cut across in ways in which we help ourselves understand who we are, socioeconomically, geographically, age and demographics? Do we know where our spending power is? If I knew what consumer spending for Asian Americans are, I can use that data we can go become a force in things. I know, you let my wife and daughter do the shopping, they're going to spend a lot of money. So I think there's a lot of purchasing power in the Asian American consumer base. Representation, you guys alluded to it, Gordon alluded to it earlier. One of the biggest things is this bamboo ceiling. And most places encourage, especially when it comes to minority and underrepresented minorities, it's about representation at the entry level. But when you look at companies like the ones we have here in Silicon Valley, we have some companies that are up to 40% in AAPI, East Asians, South Asians, Southeast Asians in employee base, 40%. So they don't have a representation issue at the entry level. But when you go up to the C-suite and the directors and the leadership, we fall way below the 40%. We don't even fall within the 6% of our national representation. So there are some serious work that needs to be done when it comes to thinking about representation, thinking about media representation, government representation, elected office representation, corporate representation. But we don't have the data to support all that yet. And so one of the TAF infrastructural things we want to build is a better understanding who we are, to do it through sentiment surveys, to do it through real good surveys and good ground truth data, and keep it current. So we have a longitudinal way of understanding who we are. I think once we understand who we are, we know then what questions we can ask and how we can help people. But even in the last year, where we're, even since we launched in May, we're learning so much about our communities. And that's why I said earlier, it gives me a lot of hope, because I feel like these are problems that I think we have great people that meanings well. We have great, and quite frankly, we've had great reception from non-Asians, right? The Jewish community, the African-American community, other foundations like the Ford Foundation, they have welcomed us with open arms. And I think that's the part that about our society that's so interesting, is that if we're willing to help ourselves, we're willing to help each other, there is this tremendous amount of hope.
Well, closing out our discussion on the next minute or so, how do you think our two organizations, which share common cause and common purposes, how do you think our two organizations can work together, and not only our organizations but our networks as well?
When they approach me, other organizations, I'm like, oh my God, these are the people. You know, we are people that need to. That you guys are obviously very successful in your professions, and I think there are ideas and things that you guys can do as a group or as individuals to influence the communities around you. So the places you work, the clients you have, there's just sort of basic evangelism work that you guys can do, advocacy work, and it doesn't even have to be heavy-handed. It could just be about pointing out some Asian American success stories or things that are good. If you guys know people who, one of the things is to sustainably fund things like this is to encourage more philanthropy among Asian Americans. I think we all looked in the mirror ourselves and said, we haven't given as much to our own communities as we may have to our, Stanford or other things that generally people give money to. So I think this idea of, creating some power, some force multiplier, how does AIM become part of the force multiplier in creating this voice for Asian Americans? And again, it's bipartisan. This isn't like some left or right wing thing. We really just think that we can be more represented. And I think you guys have a role to play in the bamboo ceiling, right? I think calling things out, mentoring, being able to develop the pipelines for people, younger professionals to have a way of leading and develop leadership. And TAF is here to partner with people. We really want to find the best of breed, best practices, and then disseminate it, right? And so I applaud and welcome, and obviously you guys know our team, Sono and others, who see people like you guys as key parts of representing professional societies that are really going to be an important part of getting to our vision of prosperity. People think about investment managers, they think you guys are prosperous, right? So this idea of being able to represent that aspect of Asian American life is super important.
Jerry, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I know you've got a lot going on, especially with the filming. I'm going to have to circle back to you, by the way, and find out if you have any interesting investments or technologies in the golf area to help me reduce my double-digit handicap. All right.
You and I both. I can tell you the one.
I hear that you have a single-digit handicap.
I have to tell you, the one area I failed is all the golf tech companies I've invested in have all gone under. So they haven't helped me yet, but we'll keep an eye out for it.
Thank you so much, Jerry, for joining us. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Have a great conference, everybody. Thank you, and thanks for having me.